Like so many, I ignored the God of War franchise until 2018. When God of War Brackets 2018 came out and proved to be so damn good, I had no choice but to go back and play the entire franchise over again from the beginning. And then God of War Ragnarok came out, and it proved to be so damn good, I had no choice but to go back and play the whole damn thing again. Again. This is the second video in our God of War franchise retrospective. If you haven't yet, you might want to watch our God of War 1 video before continuing with this review. Because this little intro right here is the only intro you're going to get. Before moving forward on the timeline, I doubled back on my own doubling back to the franchise's first prequel, Chains of Olympus. Pitched right after God of War 1 came out, developed in tandem with God of War 2, and released just under a year afterward, in March 2008. It got a lot of praise in its time for shrinking a God of War game down to something the PlayStation Portable could handle. And for all those kids in the future, a PlayStation Portable was a PlayStation, but portable. Hopefully the very idea of paying $300, $400, $500 for such a thing will strike you in the era where we have more games than we could possibly play available on our phones, as absurd as it struck me back in 2005, 6, 7, 8. Even here, when I'm speaking, in 2023, time has passed the PSP so far by that even its successor, the PlayStation Vita, has joined it in the dustbin of history. So don't expect nostalgia for hardware I never even bothered to get in the first place. Still, Chains of Olympus promised God of War on the go, and it delivered. Controlling Kratos feels the same, if not slightly better, in this 2011 home console remaster. He seems faster, more responsive to my inputs, and a little more mobile on the screen. And that will hold true for every game going forward until 2013's God of War Ascension. The camera zooms in a bit too close, a bit more often than I'd like. There aren't as many enemies on screen as there were, and soon will be again. And after double jumping over all those bottomless pits in 80s Cronenberg movie Tartarus, it takes a while for the shock of encountering all these invisible walls to eventually wear off. But once the shock wears off, we find a God of War game that's both exactly what we'd expect from the two previous console games in the franchise, and an attempt to subvert our expectations in fits and starts that seem, in this extreme retrospect, like ironic foreshadowing. On the surface, we once again open in a city under siege by hostile invaders, go from there to a temple that's basically a giant puzzle box, descend into, and then fight our way out of, the underworld, have ourselves a final boss fight that feels slightly harder than it really is, since we're so used to fighting crowds by the time we get to it, and then roll credits. 3 years on, and the franchise formula is already, clearly, setting itself in stone. Under the hood, though, we find a story of Kratos working for the man. An outlier in this franchise. And make no mistake, born from the head of Zeus as she was, Athena is definitely the man. We're somewhere between Kratos killing his family and the opening of God of War 1. Most people say 5 years, but I can't find that anywhere in the text. And as a champion of the gods, we are tasked here with maintaining the Order of Olympus, rather than destroying it. This being only the second game to come out after the release of the Zack Snyder movie 300, we also see here the franchise dipping its toes into real history for the first, and thankfully, only, time. So we open defending Attica from a Persian invasion, and there's a dead Greek guy on the rooftop we start out on. The caption box names him Eurybiades, incorrectly identifying him as an Athenian. In our dimension, Eurybiades was a Spartan naval commander, meaning he and Kratos should at least be on an, oh gods, not this asshole again, basis with each other. His presence here means we're in 480 BC. This is the second Persian invasion of Greece we're repelling, and the Persian king we kill in our opening mini-boss fight could very well be King Xerxes I. So that niece-marrying glory hound Leonidas can go eat shit in hell for all we care. We just finished what he couldn't. Is this all you'd have me do? Kratos shouts to the gods. Once maybe Xerxes and the basilisk he brought with him are both dead. As if in answer, the sun falls from the sky. That's Helios in his chariot falling to earth right there. And by getting so fantastical, shit just got ironically more real. With no countervailing force to oppose him, Morpheus, the god of dreams, still worshipped by some to this day under that name and his comic book epithet, the Sandman, starts spreading a fog throughout the world, asking the eternal question from that one Tool song, why can't we sleep forever? Even the gods are nodding off. Athena herself succumbs in the middle of giving us our mission briefing. And we must discover who pulled the sun god from the sky and put his ass back in place before everything falls under the Dream King's sway. Not bad, as bullshit fantasy adventure plots go. To once again quote an older, wiser Kratos, it will serve. Helios' temple is a nice contrast to Pandora's, being built by godly rather than mortal hands. It's an odd mix of Gothic and Art Deco that I'm going to call Art Gothic in my head, even though I know the classical revivalism that led, a few centuries later, to Art Deco was itself a response to Gothic architecture's prevalence at the start of the Renaissance. But there I go, talking about real history again, when we're clearly back in mythological no time. The sun just fell from the sky, for God's sake. In the temple we find Eros, Helios' sister, the goddess of the dawn, more commonly known now by her Roman name, Aurora. She tells us her brother's been kidnapped by the Titan Atlas, and with the power of the sun in the palm of his hand, Atlas can destroy the pillar that holds up the world. Time to reawaken the sun steeds with a little primordial fire, and go off to the underworld again, for the second, third, or, if we're dealing with these in chronological order, first time. While I am a little disappointed in the game's use of Morpheus as an Act 1 red herring, I've read enough Sandman comics to acknowledge the futility of fighting the King of Dreams. He'll fuck you up. And he'll fuck you up in ways that are pretty fucked up in themselves, since no man or god loves dramatic irony more than the original pasty emo. But to get to the underworld, we have to pass through Morpheus' dream cloud. And here we see our first vision of Kratos at home. A literal domestic scene of him carving a flute for his daughter, Calliope, named after the chief of all muses, and the patron of epic poets, from Homer to Virgil to... name your favorite epic poet now. They should have sung to her at the opening of this franchise. But naming the object of Kratos' affections after her does seem to have won them more than enough favor. Tartarus looks more like I'd expect here, which is both nice and a little disappointing. Lit as it is by Helios' presence, which at least gives us a nice landmark to chase after, we see it as a land of caves and broken architecture, rising up from the bloody river Styx. We came down here on a god's errand, but Charon the ferryman has no time for our shit. Continuing the trend of other servants of Olympus having nothing but contempt for the ghost of Sparta. And hey, maybe if you stopped calling him the ghost of Sparta all the time, he might be a little more amenable to your little errands. Just a thought I had while Eros was calling us that over and over again. Though Charon speaks to us as one slave to Zeus and the Olympians to another, he will not let us pass. It is not yet our time, nor will it ever be, but I'm wondering if he even knows that at this point. Hell, he's probably in on our true antagonist's plot, since he kicks our asses and throws us even further down than we were trying to go in the first place. To the underworld, where Zeus threw down the Titans after he won his great war against them. The light of Helios doesn't even reach down here, even though he's way closer than he should be. It's all dark canyons with sickly green highlights. The kind of green my brain calls matrix green, because it fulfills the same function, filling me with unease and making me suspect the nature of reality. Down here we find the real meat on Chains of Olympus's bones, because down here we see what the order we're holding up is truly built on top of. Surprise, it's a whole lot of misery and suffering. Like capitalism, only without capitalism's pretensions of morality. The best moment comes when a piece of the canyon wall moves. And then you realize that's not a canyon wall, that's a hand. Then your brain puts the rest of the picture together, and you realize that's the hand of a titan, strung up with the titular chains of Olympus. It's a great moment of scope and scale in a franchise known for both, and it got me feeling downright existential. Are those chains on the wall really any different from the chains binding our blades to our wrists? Is this world really worth saving? Even if it isn't, we are, at this point in Kratos' journey, an ant crawling through the gears of a machine so vast and horrifying, so anachronistically industrial, with all of its wheels and levers, that challenging it appears impossible. We are Charlie Chaplin in modern times, and traveling through this assembly line of suffering is gonna fuck us up just as bad. Yet someone has decided to challenge all this from its literal lowest point. And after fighting our way back upstairs, and apparently killing Charon, though he's the ferryman of the dead, so where the hell's he gonna go? Shit, I give it 24 hours, he'll probably be right back at work like nothing happened. We find that person is Persephone, the goddess of spring. And her villain motivation is exactly what you'd expect if you know her myth. Kidnapped by her uncle Hades, forced to marry her kidnapper by her father Zeus, with her mother Demeter not doing much more about it than throwing an annual temper tantrum, which we mortals know as fall and winter. Yeah, she's technically a queen, but she's queen of the underworld, and we've seen what's down here. It's not much to write home about. So Persephone is on a total fuck-em-all vengeance trip, preferring non-existence to an eternity in her thankless job. And I say, hashtag Persephone was right. But it doesn't matter what I or Kratos think, trapped as we are in a linear, single-player video game from 2008 that's also a prequel. Much as I'd like to use my knowledge of the future to tell Persephone we're gonna get that vengeance for her, with interest, Kratos can't help being the brick-headed sociopath he is at this point in his story, demanding things of the Queen of the Dead, like we didn't just get our asses kicked by Charon, of all people.
I care little for the world and its suffering,
he says, when Persephone reminds him of the plot. And I believe him. She's actually been using this self-centered dick-headedness against us this whole time, stringing us along with visions of Kratos' daughter that we've been chasing since the sun crashed down. Our once great Spartan military leader doesn't put it all together until he's voluntarily given up all his superpowers to enter the Elysian fields. Even then, Persephone has to tell him straight out, in a villain monologue so ill-advised, it's the kind of thing comedians use to make fun of short-sighted, self-defeating villain monologues. Sending the world crashing down into the underworld will reduce both back into the undifferentiated chaos they spawned from, annihilating everyone and everything, including Elysium, and Calliope, and presumably Kratos' dead wife as well, though we don't see her. Persephone's been ground into such a nihilistic funk that she's totally down with that. But Kratos won't reach that level of don't give a fuck until somewhere near the end of God of War 2. So we force ourselves free from our daughter's grip with the same button we mash to open doors, and get our powers back by twisting the beer caps off of Elysium's other residents. This is framed, and often interpreted, as the selfless act of a noble dad doing his best to pass a Bronze Age Kobayashi Maru test, beating the no-win scenario the only way one can, by cheating. But one could also interpret this as the selfish action of a desperate bastard, still hoping he'll actually, somehow, someday, have that eternity in paradise with his family that he clearly wants. No chance of that if paradise ceases to exist. But there was never a snowball's chance in Tartarus of it happening in the first place. And that was before Calliope saw us murder, if that's the word, all of these pure souls. The press circle to deny your daughter 3 times minigame gets all the press. But what I can't help but noticing is that this is the game where the object of Kratos' affection sees exactly what kind of monster he's become in her absence. Nominally in her name, even. For the first time in probably ever, Kratos' child sees him the same way everyone else does, and is rightly horrified. File that away for later. Eventually, it's going to become Kratos' greatest fear. And this game, this event, this QuickTime event, will be the reason why. Right now, though, it's time for a boss fight. And Persephone is both a joke in her simplicity, and no joke at all in how hard she hits, especially on hard mode. To me, she feels harder than Ares, and part of me is actually enjoying that. The goddess of spring should kick our asses. There's a reason they call April the cruelest month. So her killing me in 4 hits is better than fine. But once she calls in an assist from Atlas, and you chain him to the bottom of the world, it becomes a game of catch with her projectiles. And I felt this was pretty middling, even before I realized it was a pared-down version of the boss fight against Lachesis in God of War 2. After the fountains of gore that erupted from Ares when we killed him, the flash of light and big explosion that follows us killing Persephone here comes off as downright respectful. Someone at Ready at Dawn Studios clearly wanted a sympathetic villain as much, if not more so, than they wanted a sympathetic anti-hero. Too bad someone else also wanted to string the players along with a mystery. But that mystery takes a real back seat to the in-the-moment puzzle-solving and room-clearing. Twin poles of focus that strain the game's thin story way closer to breaking point than it can actually handle. Like the need to both equal and miniaturize its console predecessors. Or the need to tell an epic story that somehow manages to put all of its toys back in their rightful places by the end. I'm not saying Chains of Olympus is bad. It's actually quite fun. And on the whole, I'd say it's, fine. Once again, it will serve. But it's a piece of media from the mid-2000s with a clear case of prequelitis. Both relying on player familiarity with this setting and, also, inevitably, surpassing its predecessors, even though it attempts to tell a story that should theoretically precede them. I mean, we just killed the goddess of spring. So, does that mean no more springs? For anyone? Is it just going to be eternal summer? Eternal winter? No? We're not going to find out, are we? In fact, we won't see any results of this until we get all the way to God of War 3. And even then, it's mostly going to be all about Hades. But well, so it goes. I'm not sad I played Chains of Olympus, but I am glad that I played it before the other games in this franchise. With one notable exception, it's all uphill from here. And even here, it could have gone a lot lower. There are other underworlds, after all. And we're going to be visiting one next time, in the prequel to God of War 2, that no one calls a midquel, since nobody even remembers that era when Disney started to release a bunch of cheap animated films and call them midquels. So join us next time for God of War, Ghost of Sparta. Thanks for watching, everyone. Like, comment, subscribe, and if you really like, join the Patreon, like these fine people.